The views, information, and opinions expressed during the following program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent the views of Access Communications, its representatives, or its employees.
The RCMP Heritage Centre is a not-for-profit charitable organisation mandated to share the story of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is one of those stories, part of your heritage.
I grew up and raised on a farm in Angusville, Manitoba. Come from a very large family. I was second oldest in quite a large family, and soon realized that it was going to be pretty tough sledding the rest of my life to try and earn a dollar. And I had been looking at a military type of life, or semi-military, and got interested in the RCMP. I think just observing members that policed our local communities. They used to quite often stop for coffee at our farm, and that kind of interested me in that type of lifestyle. And at that time, I think I was 19 and a half when I decided to go and write the exam for the RCMP. My father, he always felt he was quite witty, and when I mentioned to him that I thought of joining the RCMP, his comment was, well, you're too lazy to work and too honest to steal, so that's maybe a good choice. I finally got my letter of acceptance, and I remember getting the letter and being so nervous I couldn't read it. I had the postmaster open it up and read it for me. And April 1960, I was sworn in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and given a train ticket to go to Ottawa for my recruit training. There were two training areas at that time. I took the train to Ottawa. I remember arriving in Ottawa in April of '60 and finding it such a bleak-looking place. And having been warned coming off the farm about people in the big city, I had to get a taxi, but I was so sure that the taxi driver was just driving around in blocks and going to charge me money. So I kept reminding him or telling him the exact route to take. I think he was getting pretty frustrated with me. I arrived in N Division, which is in Rockcliffe, Ontario. I was the last member of my troop to arrive. My grandfather had passed away about a week before I was destined to go. And when I first arrived in Ottawa, my troop had been formed up in the basement in the gymnasium. And the corporal told me to go down and join my troop. So that was my introduction. I felt that they were already seasoned, trained policemen because they had their green coveralls by then. And I felt quite out of place. Training then was 10 months. Quite a bit of it, I think about 6 or 8 months, was spent on equitation. And I enjoyed equitation because coming from a farm background, I'd done a lot of riding in the past. And although I felt I was probably one of the better riders in the troop, I was the last one to get my spurs. This was when they felt that you had gained enough proficiency, you were awarded by wearing spurs. That was disappointing to me because I felt I was the best rider, but I had all these old bad habits, as they called it, from riding Western style or bareback to all of a sudden you're riding English style. So that was a disappointing experience, but overall I believe equitation was my favorite course in training. Spent 10 months there, graduated in Ottawa, and was given a train ticket to go to my first posting, which was North Battleford Subdivision. And I was posted to a little community north, Goodsoil, Saskatchewan. That was my first posting. Well, when I arrived in Good Soil, the only accommodation I could find was a small room above the beverage room in Good Soil in the local hotel. I was only there 1 or 2 days when the hotel owner come running upstairs to get me to come down because there was a fight going on in the beverage room. The drinking age in bars in those days was 21. I rushed into the beverage room, being 20 years old, to have all the patrons yell at me to get out. I was too young, I couldn't be in there. I was breaking the law. Kind of set me back for a while because I thought, well, maybe they do have a point, but because I'm by myself and I am a member of the RCMP, I suppose that I was allowed to go in when there was lawless carryings on going in. Another embarrassing thing that same evening, a very, very huge woman decided just to sit down on the floor. And of course, with the catcalls of all the patrons, I couldn't pick her up. I was only about 180 pounds at the time. I had to drag her out of the beverage room in order to place her in the cells until this lady sobered up. That was another embarrassing moment. But I went from Good Soil, I went to Radisson, Lloydminster, North Battleford, and then I was posted to, or had an opportunity to ride with the RCMP Musical Ride in 1962. The first year in the ride, we took our training for the ride out of Regina. And that was a very good tour that year because we spent several months on the road. We traveled by train in those days. So you had a coach car for the members, a baggage car for all our equipment, and then 2 horse cars for the horses. And we would hook up to any train going in the direction we were going. We did the Western Canadian tour from Regina and then went down into the States. And I guess the most memorable, or one of the most memorable parts of that trip, we spent about a month at the Seattle World's Fair. During our stay there, they had a Canadian military tattoo, which we were part of. And of course, in those days, all the military had their own traditional uniforms. It wasn't just a single color uniform. With the different pipe bands and a beautiful grand finale, it was a very, very proud moment. And I remember that very fondly as to the pride that I felt then of being part of it. We then toured down through California. And I should say that as well, when we were in Seattle, Elvis Presley was filming the movie Meet Me at the Fair at that time. And Elvis, his personal trailer and his equipment trailer and wardrobe trailer were in the same compound as we were with our horses. So during the odd break, we got a chance to throw football a bit with Elvis and his entourage. They were known, I believe, as the Memphis Five guys that were his buddies. We toured down through San Francisco, Pomona, California, several stops in the States. We did ride in the Roy Rogers show in the San Francisco Cow Palace. And I remember probably the worst performance that I'd ever seen in the 2 years I was on the musical ride. We had did a few shows in the stadium, and when it came time, and practice rides, but when it came time for Roy Rogers to attend, they took the covers off these huge, huge, giant cameras that they had in those days. As we rode out, of course, the horses, not seeing those before, became really, really spooked. There were horses charging all over, members falling off, and to my dismay, when we rode out, we got a standing ovation. So we got to meet Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and ride in his show in '62. 1963, we had our ride training out of Ottawa, so it was an opportunity to get back to Ottawa or Rockcliffe, the training center. And that year we did a lot of the Eastern Canadian. We didn't get to the Maritimes, but the Eastern Canadian cities and the bit of the Eastern Seaboard. Remember one kind of hilarious, or I thought quite funny incident. Our riding master had taken the salute that day, and generally the officer in charge, or the riding master, would take the salute from dignitaries and request permission to proceed with the ride. It was the riding master who took the salute that day, and while we were performing, quite often the person taking the salute would ride out to be by the end of the stadium and just sit there until he ordered the ride to come back in for march past. And this occasion, the spotlight all of a sudden shone on the riding master, who generally would be sitting in the background in the dark. It kind of surprised him because I guess to pass the time, he was spearing cigarette packages with his saber. And when the spotlight hit him, of course, it startled him, and he pulled his sword up with all these empty cigarette packages skewered on it. It was a bit of a humiliating situation, I think, in Kitchener, Ontario. I had a horse that was a bit of a maverick, and you had to really show him who was boss about once a week. And unfortunately, the riding master caught me disciplining my horse after a ride one day. And we rode on a real dust-filled stadium, open-air stadium. And so when we finished the ride, we would walk the horses around the racetrack to cool them off. And this is when the riding master caught me disciplining the horse. So I was ordered to run behind the rest of my troop in the dust leading this horse. And I was quite humiliated, but the people attending the show thought it was really good. They thought it was a great way to finish off a ride. Our last ride in '63, we rode in the Christmas parade in Chicago. And I remember it lasted several hours, or a couple of hours as I recall. Bitter cold, and of course we were dressed in a red serge, and with our lances, our gauntlets, of course with our hand up for an hour or two in that cold weather. And it was nice to have finished the ride with the Christmas parade, but bitter cold, and half of our hands were numb and whatnot. Following the ride, I was transferred back to Saskatchewan and spent time in Yorkton, going through different departments there: city detachment, rural detachment, plainclothes, or then in those days it was kind of a major crime / drug section, CAMSAC, trying to think now where else I went. I spent several years kicking around different detachments and positions in Saskatchewan. I got promoted to corporal, I believe, in 1964, to sergeant in 1978. No, pardon me, 1972 corporal, and sergeant in 1978. one of my fondest, I guess, memories of one of the postings was in a community just north of Yorkton. There were 6 members there, and I spent 6 years. I thoroughly enjoyed that posting, and had a lot of humorous incidents that I recall there. I do recall that we had an elderly man living in a nursing home who was a chronic complainer. He was phoning us all the time, complaining that the nurses were stealing things from him and whatnot, and he was a real grumpy, bitter old man. In any case, not getting the response, I guess, he had called saying that he thought the nurses stole a pocket knife. When I went to investigate or look into his problem, the nurses assured me, yes, they'd taken his pocket knife because he kept threatening them with it. I guess this gentleman didn't get the response from the RCMP that he thought he should, because about a week later I got a letter, and it went along the lines from this man, I'll just use the first name, Jacob, saying that the doctors and nurses had captured him and were holding him prisoner and torturing him and doing experiments on him. Of course, the spelling wasn't quite the best, and he signed his name. I disregarded this letter, not believing there's any credibility to it, but I have to give the gentleman credit for thinking it out, because about a week later I got a second letter, and it went along that we are the doctors and nurses that are holding Jacob prisoner, and we're torturing him and doing experiments on him, and it was signed P.S. the doctors and nurses. It met a lot of different characters, I guess, at that posting. We had just got an answering machine installed in the detachment, and if someone was to phone the detachment when there's no one present, it would direct the caller to phone this number at a communications center and give them a phone number. Now, generally in the weekend, our members would be out on patrol. They wouldn't be in the office. We lived right in the quarters there, and I went into the office early one Monday morning. The phone was ringing and ringing. As I answered the phone, the voice, a female voice, said to me, "And where were you?" And I asked her, "What do you mean?" "Where were you? I phoned you Saturday and I phoned you Sunday. Where were you?" And I went on to explain that, look, you probably, there was no one in the office. You would have got a voice message directing you to phone a communications center. And there was a long, long pause, and the woman said then, "Are you there now?" Another funny incident, living in quarters there in the house attached to the office, one hot summer day, my day off, I'd been out working in the yard out in the back, and so just had a pair of summer shorts on. I didn't have a shirt on or anything. And I'd gone in the house, I heard the doorbell ringing. I went to the door, and there was an elderly lady standing there. When I went to open the door, I had a little pup that I just got, and it tried to run out of the house. I bent over and grabbed the dog by the collar, and of course all this lady could see was a bare top and bare legs, while she ran down the steps yelling, "Naked man, naked man." I had to run after her and show her, no, I wasn't really naked. I did have shorts on. But I spent 6 years there, and various postings then in the plainclothes branches, North Battleford, like I say, Yorkton, North Battleford. I was in charge of federal unit in North Battleford, mostly drug work there, and eventually ended up in charge of Swift Current City Detachment as a staff sergeant, and retired out of Swift Current in 1996. I then went to work at Casino Regina for a year, and then with the Provincial Liquor and Gaming branch for about 6 years after retiring and doing a bit of volunteer work and part-time work at the RCMP Heritage Centre. We had a young rookie who was really, really afraid about when he would see his first body of a person. There had been a murder not that long before he arrived, and so we'd advised him that the body was in the basement of the detachment and that he would have to take fingerprints from this deceased person, that he was covered over with a tarp, but that we had both arms out sticking underneath the tarp. So he was given a roller and an ink pad and told to go down and fingerprint this body. Now, of course, we had a member that was laying under the tarp and not a body. When the member reached to take his hand to try and fingerprint him, the member under the tarp grabbed him with both arms, and of course the screams that come out of the basement were quite humorous. Another trick we used to play on a lot of the new members, we'd tell them that since they're newly arrived, people in the community wouldn't know him, and that we had a bootlegger that we wanted him to buy illegal liquor from. We would provide a friend of ours, a civilian, with a bottle in advance, a bottle of liquor, and of course the rookie would have to use his own money. So we'd send him in to buy this bootleg liquor from this bootlegging suspect. The member would then arrest the individual, bring him back to the office. We would instruct him how important it was to put exhibit labels on the seized liquor and to make sure that exhibits were controlled very closely. So the bottle would be placed on the booking in desk. While we were booking the prisoner in, the so-called prisoner, of course, this person arrested would grab the bottle and start drinking it, much to the horror of the young constable. But those are just some of the incidents, I guess, that we would pull in young guys coming to your detachment. When I first went into plainclothes investigations, I guess, in those days, of course, a lot of our time was spent, or a lot of our efforts were spent on safe blowings. Gangs would go along blowing safes in small towns, credit unions, elevators. In those days, grain elevators paid a lot of the grain purchases by cash, and the criminals knew that there's usually a lot of money in grain elevators. So we spent a lot of time on those type of investigations. I remember a person, I guess, a corporal that had been on plain clothes, who stands out in my mind as being one of the better investigators I guess I'd met. He was my boss at this one location. I had only been on plainclothes investigations a short time, and I had made a point of trying to get information from people that would know what was going on in the criminal world. I felt very proud because, excuse me, this individual that I had, I guess, groomed to be a confidential informant had informed me as to who had blown the safe at a small town out of Yorkton. And I couldn't wait to get and tell this corporal of mine, who was my mentor, that I knew who did this crime the week before. He didn't seem as enthusiastic when I told him. And he finally told me that if you're going to be a good investigator, you tell me who's going to do what next week. And that always, I guess that always stayed with me. And I remember trying to impart that on a lot of the young people that through the years had come to work for me. In other words, that's fine that you knew who did something a week ago. You tell me who's going to do something next week, so we're prepared and waiting for that, those people. So I guess that was just one little bit of knowledge, I guess, or instructions that always stayed with me during my days as a plainclothes investigator. Our ride in, our tour in Pomona, California, again, that was 1962, and Pomona was kind of the heart of the wine industry and the grape industry at that time. Just about every morning, and I guess it was grapes that weren't suitable to make wine, but this individual would come by the stables with a tractor and a trailer loaded with crates of grapes that probably weren't suitable for wine. And he would hand out these crates of grapes to us or other people that were working around the exhibition grounds at that time. We soon found out, starting off just as treats, feeding these grapes to our horses, they just loved them. It was like catnip to a cat. We'd end up opening the crates and just dumping crates of grapes to our horses. And that was a real treat for the horses, but unfortunately, they all got diarrhea. And I recall, fortunately, I wasn't behind this particular horse. We had a horse that one of my friends rode named Banner, which always had the heaves. It always had terrible coughing problems. And with all the grapes that it had eaten, it of course had diarrhea, so any time, even during our performance, old Banner would cough, the people riding behind him, their uniforms would get decorated, of course, as a result of overconsumption of grapes. Our officers soon found out what was going on, and we were read the riot act, and we soon learned to quit doing that.